Good afternoon and welcome to the Lawyer Assistance Program Oversight Committee meeting of the State Bar of California. As a reminder, this meeting is recorded. Under the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, remote members of the committee must be visible on camera unless such appearance would be technologically impractical. If so, the members shall announce the reasons for their non-appearance during the roll call. Remote members must also disclose any individuals aged 18 years or older in the room with them. Erica, can you please take roll?
Yes. Jim Heighton,
I'm present.
Lisa Johnson,
Present.
Tracy Lesage,
Here.
Joan Lubomirsky,
Present.
Deidre Nguyen,
Present.
Ryan Peterson, Elise Yenny,
Present.
Catherine Young, Heather Benton.
Present. Do we have a quorum?
Yes, we have 7 of the 9, so we have quorum.
Perfect. Next on the agenda is a call for public comment. Before we begin public comment, I would like to remind everyone that under the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, public comments must pertain to items that are on the agenda or be related to matters that are within the jurisdiction of this agency. Specifically, the LAP Oversight Committee exercises oversight on the Lawyers Assistance Program. The LAP Oversight Committee does not have authority over attorney discipline, and there are no attorney discipline matters on the agenda for today's meeting. Do we have anybody for public comment? Is there anybody in the waiting room?
There are no members of the public who have indicated that they would like to give public comment. There's nobody in the waiting room.
Perfect. We will continue moving then. Okay, let's move through. All right, so we are going to, it sounds like there are no members of the public who have indicated they would like to give public comment. So we will move to the chair's report. So this is Tracy's last meeting. It's very sad. Wanted to let everybody know, and Tracy, wanted to thank you for all your hard work. You've been on this committee for a very long time, but have been so integral and such an active participant. I had the opportunity to work with you on a couple of working groups. Really am grateful that I got to know you a little bit better.
Thank you.
So do you have any comments? And then we'll ask everybody to, if they have any comments.
I would just, it is bittersweet, but with all things in life, change is good. I think the work we've done has enriched not only others' lives, but my own. And I am sad to go, but it's definitely time. It's been great working and getting to know everyone. And I'm sure, I'm excited, I should say, to see what you guys come up with in terms of the program and how to make it better, which is our common goal that we all have. But other than that, if anybody needs anything, I'm doing criminal appellate work. And I have a big heart, so I'm doing it for the indigent. So if anybody, knows anybody that needs a hand, send them my way. Anyways, otherwise, take care and reach out.
Yeah, so this is Jim Heighting. I wanted to say I worked also with Tracy, and I found her to be very productive and willing and joined in and contributed. And she wasn't somebody who said, I'll be there and then wasn't. She was Johnny on the spot and really put in an effort to make this program better, just like she said. So whatever you're going to do, Tracy, in the future, best of luck, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to say something to Tracy before we jump to our next topic? Well, Tracy, there are some very big shoes to fill, but very much grateful for your participation, and we will miss you. That being said, along with Tracy, I am not leaving the committee, but I will be done with my term as chair as of this meeting, after this meeting. And so Jim will be taking over as chair. And we do need a vice chair. So we would like to fill it ASAP. Is there anyone on the committee that's here right now that would be interested in the vice chair position? And if you want to think about it, feel free to think about it and to email Michelle and Jim and let them know that you are interested.
Would it be possible to get kind of a description of like the duties required for that?
I would think that would be possible. Jim or Michelle, do we have that?
It would be possible unless, Jim, you just want to share a little bit about what it has been like for you over this past year.
Sure. Sure. I don't know if it's possible to find a description specifically in a paragraph or two, but you know, the vice chair does whatever is required to assist the chair in moving things along and to try to advance the interests of the LAP. So in my case, that involved excuse me, being a liaison between a few committees and other bodies, contributing to the input from the LAP into those other bodies so that they could prepare their programs and their reports and that sort of thing. Report back to Heather, get Heather's input and ideals, work with Michelle, and also with the staff of the State Bar in preparing things. And really, it's whatever is required to put it together and help out. It didn't require much in the way of necessary leadership other than to step in when Heather was away or wasn't available. So that's
If
about
I
it.
may add, important for succession planning also, because now you will be stepping into the role of chair. And so hopefully the person who takes the vice chair role will start to learn it and then be able to take the role of chair the following year.
I did find that one of the requirements was to be active and not to be passive and not to be absent. So when you think about that, make sure you have the energy and the willingness to be active.
And I would say Jim did a really great job because there was a couple of times this past year where I was just unavailable for various reasons. And he really stepped into things and handled the meetings and also handled a couple of the working group collaborations that we were working on, which you will hear about later. So yes, it's not a busy role, but it's a interactive role. And I think that I actually think it's a really great place to kind of learn more about the committee as well, because that's where I kind of cut my teeth was as vice chair, and then to be able to move into chair and realizing that the chair role is 1 year. So it's 1 year vice chair, 1 year chair, and then you are welcome to, take the next step, whatever that looks like for you. Great. Okay, well, if you are interested, please let Jim and Michelle know. Okay, next we have the staff report, which is being presented by Ken Norse and Michelle Harmon.
Ken, do you mind, before you start, why don't I introduce some of the new faces that are here?
Please do.
Starting with Rachel Brewer, who is Ken's direct supervisor. I don't think this team has met Rachel yet. So Rachel, I guess I could like you to introduce yourself, Rachel. But Rachel is an attorney in Office of Professional Competence and is doing the management of the support services side in a nutshell.
Yes, thank you so much, Michelle. It's nice to be here. It's nice to meet everyone. I'm really looking forward to working with all of you. I started in this position as a managing attorney in April of this year. Prior to that, I was doing conflicts and legal ethics at a big law firm. And before that, I was actually at the bar in the Office of Chief Trial Counsel. So I'm very happy to be back at the bar. And like I said, happy to be working with all of you. It's nice to meet everyone.
And then the next new person is Shelley Fraser, who some of you have probably met before in her previous role as one of our clinical monitoring analysts on the monitoring side of lab. And with Melanie, as those of you who remember, Melanie Lawrence has retired, and so it's not a one-to-one replacement of her role, but I've moved into more of a management role, and so Shelley is now supervising the monitoring LAP. And Shelley, if you'd like to say anything.
Hi. No, it's just really nice to meet you all and see some of you again. Yeah, I've been Michelle was kind enough to hire me. In 2018, I started as our job titles have changed many times, but basically one of the clinical monitoring analysts in the LAP. And I love it. I love this job. And so, yeah, when it opened up, the opportunity it opened up to take on a supervisor role, wouldn't say I jumped at it. I thought about it a lot. And then when I realized Michelle would still be around with me here to help me learn all the things that really, I took the job. But I'm very happy to be here and great to see all of you. Looking forward to working with you.
And finally, Erica Troutman, who I think you all have at least communicated with on email, because Erica is the new committee coordinator now. So Erica is the one who will help do all of the things that you need to prepare for the meeting, who does the booking of the rooms if you need some offsite meeting room, and preparing the agenda, posting all of the information. And so she will be the go-to person for the committee, and has been an excellent addition. With those of you who remember, Matt Adams also retired, and so she's taking on the administrative work in the monitored side of the LAP, and she also works with the office, and has for several years worked with the Office of Probation.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you. As Michelle mentioned, I started with the State Bar about 3 years ago with the Office of Probation as a program specialist. And with all things moving in the State Bar, I was offered like a dual role to assist with LAP as well. So now I am a program coordinator for LAP and the Office of Probation. And as she mentioned, taking over the committee meetings as a coordinator. So it's nice to meet you. I have interacted with some of you. It's nice to put a face to a name and an email. So I look forward to working with you all.
All right, and then for my staff report, I was going to give the update on the financial assistance grants. And, we've talked about the grants a lot over the past year since planning to move the financial assistance from a loan to a grant, which started January 1st. There have been some different iterations of how we're administering the grant. And I know this committee had been very concerned about wanting to really be careful about budgeting the money that we have left and how we're going to be spending it with the grantees. And we really didn't know what was going to happen once it changed from a loan to a grant. Were more people going to apply for it? Our numbers are a little bit lower. Is it going to be less? Well, it turns out we had budgeted the $33,000 for grants this year. And as of August 15th, we reached that limit of granting $33,000. There are 12 people that has covered. So 2 people qualified for 50% based on the criteria that we had published. And then, so that's 1,500 each. And then 10 people qualified for 100% of the grant money, which was 3,000 each. There were 4 people who applied and were denied because they were above the income threshold for their household. So right now, what we have told people is that the grant is closed for the year. I've talked with finance. We've looked to see if there's savings from staff leaving or any other areas that we can move money from. There just isn't right now. And this, if you've looked ahead on the agenda, we have on there some planning for next year. So I am imagining that this is going to be something that the committee is going to want to work on for 2026 and figure out how we can budget that money differently if we're not okay with it, ending. But we've still got September, October, 4 months left of the year, and we've started a wait list. So we've told people that if more money becomes available, which is possible if people who were given the grants withdraw, for example, before they use up the money, then we'll have some extra money that we can then give to the next person on the wait list. But right now that's closed.
Any questions about that specifically? I do have a question, Michelle, and it's only because I don't recall the way we rewrote things. Is there any room for us to offer loans to those people who maybe are on the waiting list and need some help? Like to say, okay, the grant funding is used, but there are some limited loan funds available, or are we completely out of the funding altogether?
Not the way it's written now for the remainder of 25. We ended the loan option, and so now we only have the grant option. Okay, then that's it for my staff report. Ken.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's great to see everyone again. I joined the Support Lawyer Assistance Program site about 2 years ago. My first year was spent really beefing up resources that were available on the web and doing a lot of program planning. And I'm really happy to say that our programming has really taken off in 2025. And I'm just going to talk about what's on the calendar for now through the end of the year and just a little foreshadowing of what's coming up in 2026. This month on September 9th, we're beginning the 4th iteration of our Refocus program, which is our executive function strategies for success in law that's targeting functional areas that are impacted by ADHD. Although this 4th iteration, we do have a lower enrollment than our prior 3 sessions, I'm really happy to say that 50% of registrants are law students, which was a result of outreach that I did to all California Law School student services offices. It's great to have law students involved in support lab programming so they become familiar with LAP as a resource for when they practice. We'll have 3 live sessions that are focused on the most common areas of need: motivation regulation, planning and problem solving, and working memory. The sessions are led by Lisa Spenlove, who did our prior 3 sessions. She's a 20-year lawyer assistance program group leader. She'll be joined in one session on the planning and problem solving by Barb Hubbard, who's an ADHD coach. It's very interesting. Her background's actually in early childhood education. And I'm very happy to report that we will have a new addition to speakers. Lisa will be joined by a senior practicing California attorney to share his own experience with ADHD, including how he's implemented some of the strategies that Lisa's going to be talking about. In addition to that, in this month, I'll be recording a new MCLE. It's a prevention and detection subfield credit called Overcoming Obstacles to Getting Help. This will include 3 speakers from a medical, a recovery, and a mental health perspective, and they'll talk about obstacles both that prevent us from realizing that we have a problem, and then the obstacles that prevent us from getting the help that we need and how to overcome that. I'm really happy to report that our incoming chair, Jim, has agreed to record a brief introduction to the program, likely in October, and I'll be reaching out to you later, Jim, to schedule that. In addition to that MCLE, I'm finalizing a toolkit so that others can put on a prevention and detection MCLE. The title is Alcohol, Health, and Attorney Wellness, and this is based on a March 2025 CLA, California Lawyers Association MCLE that I put on. I do sit on the Health and Wellness Committee there. And this really focuses on the physical health impacts of alcohol use. It really draws on the 2025 former U.S. Surgeon General's report on alcohol and cancer risks. And then the program also looks at the personal and professional impacts of alcohol use. When we presented it live, it was led by an attorney speaker in recovery, and I'll be encouraging people who use the toolkit to source a similar speaker. Then in October, I'm really excited to be announcing the launch of a brand new program. It's a law office management support program called Retool, and this will be our inaugural pilot. We'll have 3 live sessions that are focused on topics that came out of solo and small firm survey data and legal community input that we solicited. This programming will be really focusing on solo and small firms. I'm happy to say that it's in collaboration with the CLA Solo and Small Firm section and CalBar Connect, but it's entirely led and structured by LAP. The 3 topics are going to be opening a law firm, then law firm administration, and finally, client communication and expectation setting. Client communication issues are the #1 source of complaints actually against solo and small firms. And then finally, turning to sort of the November, December, January timeframe, we'll have our 4th iteration of the Reset Bar Retaker program, which focuses on mental health and study strategies to help retakers succeed. The mental health sessions are led by Lara Lisby, who's a longstanding LAP group leader as well. The studies strategy sessions are led by California Law School academic success professors. Topics include things like resilience, study strategies tailored to each section of the California bar, and then specific strategies for retakers for the final push and test day. I expect that in this 4th session, although it's still in planning, that we'll have 5 live sessions, similar to the one that we just had for the July bar. And I've also developed a library of 3 recorded sessions, including one, for example, on interpreting a score report, which is really important for a retaker, right? So they know what to focus on. And then lastly, I'm finalizing our programming calendar for 2026. The likely theme concerns issues that are important at the beginning and ending of legal careers, right? Beginnings and endings are so important. For example, among junior attorneys, based on studies, we see higher levels of anxiety, depression, substance misuse, suicidal ideation. We also see things like financial concerns, right? Student loans are quite overwhelming these days. And there's also an increase, which I'm seeing in law schools among students, is career concerns in the face of AI and other factors. And then for the senior attorneys, the ones who are getting ready to leave the profession, we see physical health challenges, aging and illness, mental health challenges, confronting aging, your own identity, retirement, cognitive decline, and many of the same issues that junior attorneys face. And so I'm really excited to explore programming around those themes. I welcome any and all ideas, and I'm happy to say that in 2026, we'll likely include a spring and fall mindfulness series as well, which I'm considering calling Revive, but I haven't discussed that title yet with Rachel, my new supervisor. So that completes sort of a program overview for the end of this year and sort of a little foreshadowing about 2026.
Great, thank you, Ken and Michelle. Anyone have any questions for Ken?
Jim Hiding. Ken, your energy makes me tired, man.
Oh, wow.
I mean, gee whiz. But it's great, and those programs sound really great. Do all your programs come out of our budget?
That's something I'll defer to Rachel and Michelle on, actually. I'm not involved in that aspect.
Okay, and so what's your chain of command that goes up that involves us?
We actually just met my new supervisor, Rachel Brewer, who's on the call here. So she's actually taken Kathy Ongiri's place.
But
okay.
Jim, I can answer that question. Ken's position and the funding of the programs for that position, to the extent that there is a cost associated with them, many of them are virtual, as you can imagine, is part of the overall LAP budget. That's correct. The overall LAP budget, so the monitored side and the support side.
Okay, because I know budget is going to be an important issue for the future. The second thing I wanted to ask you, though, is how do you develop these programs and the ideas, and where do they come from, and how much input does LAP Oversight Committee have in those programs?
Yeah, well, the first thing is I welcome any and all ideas, and I would see any ideas coming from the LAP Oversight Committee to be, on par and possibly even more important than the feedback that I both get from the legal community, as well as the results of studies that have been done. So I constantly interface with leadership from CLA, CalBar Connect, as well as change lawyers, in addition to people who, for example, will just spontaneously contact LAP and say, hey, we have this idea. I also meet monthly with the CMAs and that group on the monitored LAP side, and they are in constant contact with attorneys who have various issues that might be well suited to topics for support LAP programming, and we solicit that. So it's really a multi-pronged approach. And so, for example, the ADHD programming that we're doing is a direct result of several years of requests for that kind of program programming within the lawyer assistance program. I'm really happy to say that the law office management program was first introduced to me by Leah Wilson. She was very excited about providing better support to her solo and small firm attorneys. And I guarantee you she's been hearing requests, and others within the bar have been hearing requests for that kind of support, which was also borne by the solo and small firm needs survey that was done last year. So it's really, as I said, a multi-pronged approach, but I welcome ideas from committee members, and the legal community of California.
Well, one thing I would suggest is that communication be opened up a little bit between the staff and the committee members, because these are programs that I applaud. I certainly applaud them and applaud your energy in putting them on. But things that I didn't know about, things that I was unaware of, and things that I would like to attend or maybe even have input into. And so maybe a little advance notice that this is what we're planning, this is what I want to do. Do you have any input for it? Do you want to be involved? Especially to these committee members that are so important in the oversight of the lawyer assistance program. That's a suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Anybody else have any comments? I actually did have a couple of things, Ken, that I wanted to ask about. One is, so we're doing a lot of training for attorneys who have ADHD, wellness issues, addiction issues, neurodivergence. But what about their managers? I sat on the Disability Advisory Committee for State Compensation Insurance Fund a while back, and collaboratively with CLA's Wellness Committee, I wrote an article about sort of managing ADHD in the age of COVID and how managers can interact with their staff more effectively. And I think as someone who also has ADHD, I find that managers don't know how to handle it. They're like either terrified by it or very judgmental about it, as well as the addiction issue. Managers don't know how to handle that. So I'm wondering if there's any way to provide some tools and training for people who are managing people to understand how to work with attorneys, particularly new attorneys, but attorneys of all generations, who might be struggling with mental illness or addiction or ADHD, and how do you interact in a more healthy way that will help them grow as an attorney, but will also make sure you as the manager, the work is getting done at the same time.
Absolutely. I just wanted to mention that, it's certainly very important. We also get questions, for example, during the ADHD series about like, how do I ask for accommodations and things like that? I've been really sensitive about programming in that area because it's really a third rail. It involves ADA accommodations, it involves employment law and these other things. And we haven't decided whether or not this would be the appropriate forum to sort of address those issues within LAP. CLA is an organization that I'm heavily involved in, and it might be better for employment attorneys to sit in on that or others, but very, very open to exploring that field. As I said, we kind of see that from attendees of the ADHD through their questions about accommodations and how do I talk to my manager about this, but we've been very hesitant to address that so far, but totally open.
I would love to actually collaborate with you on that. I think that's a really big issue, and I've seen several places who just sort of refuse to provide accommodations, not just from my experience, but from other people's experience. So I think chatting about that and where that falls, I'm happy to chat with you. So I'll get in touch with you. My other thought was, has there ever been any discussion of maybe a wellness conference or something like that, that people could, so maybe have it on site where people can really connect in a deeper way with each other. So I'm just wondering, have you guys given any thought to that? Is it completely out of our budget? Is that something even that would be feasible?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I myself am a huge proponent of in-person programming, but when I'm working on programming, we have about 250,000 people that we serve, and with population centers, in the north and the south, very far from each other. And so, my biggest concern is accessibility for something like that. So many people in the legal community in California would be locked out if we require them to pay for a flight or, something else to attend done this, which is why all of the programming that I've done, aside from, scattered MCLEs that I do in person in San Francisco, for example, that we do programming remotely, just so that the largest number, I'm always thinking about ROI here in our program. I want to my goal is to reach as many people as possible with this valuable programming. You do something in person, it's very hard to get everyone and empower everyone to be able to attend. So that's my biggest fear with that kind of program. I'm very open to it. I am an in-person person. Actually, I think you get the biggest impact from programming in person, but we are in a state the size of France with a huge attorney population. And so I think that's a great goal. I just am not certain how we would be able to do that.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, Michelle and Ken, it sounds like that's it for the staff report. Great. So next on the agenda is item 3.1, approval of the April 25th, 2025 open session minutes. Are there any corrections or modifications to the open session minutes? Okay. Could I have a motion, please, and a second?
Motion.
Moved by Elite, Dr. Yenny.
I'll second.
Great. So we have moved by Dr. Yenny, seconded by Tracy. Erica, please call the roll.
Jim Hiding,
Yes.
Lisa Johnson,
Yes.
Joan Lubomirsky,
Yes.
Deidre Nguyen,
Yes.
Ryan Peterson, Catherine Young, and Heather Benton.
I will abstain. I was not here.
Thank you, Skip.
Me.
You call Tracy.
I'm a yes.
Yeah, I called
Thanks.
Tracy.
Tracy, okay. And Elise.
Yes.
Okay, so that passes.
So motion passes.
Great, thank you. Next on the agenda is item 4.1, report from the working group on attorney wellness collaboration. This item is presented by myself, Heather Benton, as well as the incoming chair, Jim Hiding. I think Jim's going to kick it off.
Okay, well, we did plan collaboration efforts in regard to our efforts. So the plan was to avoid duplication of efforts and to make our efforts toward ideals of wellness effective as they could be. And so we were considering all of the different bodies in the state bar that contribute to those ideals, CLA among others. And we decided to explore a collaborative effort to put things together and see what the interest was in moving that effort forward. So we sent out some emails and some feelers and ticklers and developed some leadership within a body to collaborate to put this effort together to collaborate. And basically, it was in my opinion, it fell into a position where, well, if you do it, we'll support you and that'd be great. And we don't really want to put the effort into it too much. We'll do our own thing. And so the idea of having somebody lead the charge and put all of that together, it just wasn't practical. And so I think we decided to abandon that effort. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I would echo what Jim said. It was a lot of enthusiasm, but a lot of sort of apathetic, energy towards, in making this happen. And while I think it's a really great idea, perhaps it's something that either somebody with a little bit of bandwidth on staff can take up, or another committee member can take up if it's something we actually want to continue with. But it also sounds like Ken is really doing a lot of that work himself, in collaborating with some of the other wellness organizations and bar associations and whatnot. So I'm wondering really if it's something that we can just kind of let go of in general. And then, Ken, should you need assistance with that, you can come back to the committee and request that, and then we can put together a working group. Okay. Awesome. Okay, next on the agenda is item 4.2, report and request to adopt recommendations from the working groups on benchmark and successful completion. This item is presented by Dr. Yenny, Tracy Lesage, and Catherine Young, although I don't see Catherine, so it sounds like it'll be just Dr. Yenny and Tracy.
Thank you. So let me pull up my notes just so I don't forget anything. So Tracy, Catherine, and I have been meeting. I think we gave a brief update last meeting, but we've really, this committee started back in the day. I think Heather was on it, and it's gone through multiple iterations, and we kind of keep going through the same cycles of ideas. But I think we finally kind of landed on some recommendations to bring to the committee. So I wanted to also say a huge thank you to Tracy for all of your work on this. So she did some really great research about alternative court models. And at the beginning of our meetings, we were really kind of trying to think about if we were to structure lap completion standards based on some of these like alternative court models. In the materials that Michelle put together, there's a really great table that she put together to really demonstrate why we can't do that actually, because LAP is very different than all of the other models that we were looking at. The function of California's LAP differs quite a bit from other states' LAPs, which also kind of limits our ability to administrate the program in the same way. And so without getting into too much of the technical things, we came up with some recommendations that sound really simple, but I think are pretty important. So one of those is to differentiate the difference between monitoring and treatment in terms of the program materials, because they really are two distinct things. And I think that it's important for both participants and other external stakeholders to know that. And then our other recommendation is to change, so we would include for the people who are sentenced to LAP for ADP and are required to complete the program, we would leave the 3-year recommendation, which is actually quite a bit shorter than most other programs. So I know the courts are saying it's too long, but everybody else we talked to is saying it's too short. So it seems to be a bit of a Goldilocks time frame between those two groups. But we would change that to, instead of saying 3 years of continuous sobriety, we would remove the continuous sobriety and kind of make it a little bit more flexible to accommodate a lot of the literature that we know about in terms of recovery. So that if somebody does have a relapse, it doesn't necessarily mean they're starting from square one. That would also allow the clinicians a little bit more flexibility to make their own clinical recommendations. So Tracy, feel free to jump in, and Michelle, if I forgot anything.
I think you covered that very well. And
you.
thank you, Michelle, for the chart. It really does help align how they don't align. Thanks.
Any questions for, well, actually, we need to make the motion, and then I will open the floor for questions. So there is a motion that they've presented to us I will read it and then I will ask for a motion and a second. So be it resolved that the Oversight Committee adopts the recommendation advanced by the Working Group on Benchmarks and Successful Completion to include wording that differentiates monitoring from treatment in the Lawyer Assistance Program monitoring paperwork. And it is further resolved that the Oversight Committee adopts the recommendation advanced by the Working Group on Benchmarks on Benchmarks and Successful Completion to remove the requirement of continuous sobriety stability for the successful completion criteria for the Lawyer Assistance Program monitoring. May I have a motion, please?
Heather, would you like us to put this on the screen also? I
That
know
would be
people
great,
have it
yes.
probably in their written materials.
Yes, and it is attached to the agenda as well.
Erica, do you have that available or do you want me to? Okay, Erica's gonna put it up.
Great. Do I have a motion?
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to move, but I can.
Yes. I have Dr. Yenny moved to adopt this recommendation. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Tracy seconded, so we have a motion and it was seconded. Is there any comments or discussion?
I'm just wondering, Jim Heiting, as to is there a substitution or an explanation of any evaluation rather than continuous sobriety and stability? What else would be there instead?
So I don't think there would be a replacement, but that would allow for greater flexibility for the clinicians to modify the treatment plan to incorporate basically their recommendations based on like the severity of the relapse and things like that.
So simply that it's not an absolute necessity to have that complete sobriety.
Correct.
Right, and
Thank you.
still the other requirements, so take out the word continuous, but the other requirements that are outlined on the very last page of the agenda item, the very last column under California lab status quo, the other completion criteria will still remain, which is satisfying the terms of the monitoring plan, lifestyle changes that support ongoing recovery and stability. So it will still be the same process for the participants to go through. What they do right now is they write a letter, for lack of a better word, which they talk about with their LAP support group about the progress they've made, changes, how they've identified their triggers for relapse, how they're going to address them, what their resources are, what they're going to be doing to maintain their recovery after LAP. Talk about it in group, meet with the clinical team, have the clinical team also review all of that information with them and determine if they've met all of the requirements. So what it would do is allow the clinical team to determine that somebody has completed if they've put together 3 years of sobriety, even if it had been interrupted, which also would be relevant for those people who sometimes we have an issue with the monitoring being disruptive. It's not even necessarily a relapse, but there was something that happened to disrupt the monitoring, and so LAP could not verify for whatever. Unfortunately, sometimes it's related to testing problems or they missed a test, and then by the time they find out about that the test is missed, and then they're not able to take another one to make that would cover the same time frame. So so it would give some leeway in those situations, not necessarily just relapse. And for the people who are here for mental health issues, part of the cycle of mental health, if somebody perhaps having some return of some depressive symptoms, but doesn't mean that they've entirely lost all of the work that they've done or their treatment and been or disruption in their medication or anything, but then they've learned how to manage that, get back on their feet again, use their resources, and then they would not need to restart their 3 years either.
Thank you. Makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Yes, it looks like Joan has a question.
Yes, I just like to understand, and I think this is probably the case, is that if a participant has a shall we say, a serious relapse that lasts a long time, and that is, as I said, very serious, the clinician could, if in their view it's appropriate, possibly send them back to 3 years, or at least not just let that slide if it's something that's very serious.
Yes. Yeah. So this would kind of allow a more individualized approach to look at really the circumstances of the relapse and then make a very specific recommendation in that case, whether that be adding more time or whatever the case may be.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I actually do have a question. So I'm looking at the materials you guys submitted, and on page 4, you talk about the key criteria for completion remains unchanged, lifestyle changes, satisfactory compliance. And then it says, therefore, completion may take longer than 3 years if a participant is unable to demonstrate a significant period of sobriety or stability in the first 3 years, fails to integrate lifestyle changes that support continued sobriety and stability, or fails to satisfactorily comply with the monitoring plan. But how do we define a significant period of sobriety?
That's really kind of taking us back to the
Yeah.
whole original question. I mean, yeah, that was kind of the existential question that we were grappling with. And again, most of the other programs are defining it as 5 years or more. There's not really a great consensus in the clinical literature either. So I don't know, Michelle, if you want to speak to that more as well.
For the purpose of the program, how we've been defining it, it's actually on page 4 also, but in the footnote, is trying to distinguish between a lapse and a relapse, one being a return to pre-treatment types of behaviors and uncontrolled use, and one being there are cases where somebody has a temporary departure from their sobriety, so they whatever happens, they go someplace, they have a drink, and then they immediately say, this is what happened, this was a mistake, let's come back to using my resources and figuring out and start going to meetings again. So so that's part of why we have the clinicians on staff, is so that they can use their clinical judgment in helping the person figure out what happens during this relapse and what is the next step for them. And of course, if there is somebody who has a return to their uncontrolled use or previous behavior patterns, then the team will be recommending treatment, and then we'll be pulling in other treatment providers and other programs to ask their opinions about where they're at in their recovery process and what the next steps are for them.
I totally get that. As someone who has been sober for 13 years, I question, who's also sponsored people, whether the wisdom in saying, like, removing the continuous sobriety component, because there is often, sometimes people just don't think they have a problem, and they'll be like, I'm gonna go out and drink, and then they get caught, and then they go, okay, I'm gonna do it right, and then let me just finish this program, and then they go back and do it when they're done with the program. And I have seen this happen, not specifically with LAP, but in life, where and I was one of those people for a long time who was like, I don't really have a problem, I'm gonna go out and drink, and I wonder, because this is kind of a disciplinary kind of action in terms of the monitoring, the inclination to be truthful, at times, someone may be disinclined towards that because they want to just get done and get over with it. So that is my concern in saying it doesn't have to be continuous. Oh, it was a lapse in judgment. There's lapse in judgment, but I promise you, like, there have been times when someone's given me a drink and I've tasted it and I'm like, no, spit it out, like, bring me something non-alcoholic. But there's also people, and I had a sponsee do this, say, well, I just wanted to try it and see how it is, but now I'm really sorry I did it. And it's like, that's not really a lapse in judgment. That's just a, like, you probably, like, what is the issue? So I guess that's my concern. And so along with that is Dr. Yenny was saying that most programs have a longer period of time. Are those longer periods of time continuous sobriety or stability, or are those longer periods of time just like you have to take 5 years to get yourself together? How did that work? I guess so that's kind of a two-pronged question.
I think that's
Mr.
part of
Tracy.
it.
I'm not sure
Oh,
what the
go ahead,
question
Tracy.
is.
Sorry, okay, so
Well,
my
I was
first,
gonna say, but before I forget, is everything that you were stating regarding how you decide whether it's significant or not, wouldn't the clinician who's trained be able to do that? I mean, that was my thought when you were talking, but maybe rephrase the question. I don't know.
Well,
yeah,
I had a few thoughts. So I think Tracy's point is well made that really what we're trying to do is allow for more flexibility on the clinician's part to develop an individualized treatment plan so that they who ostensibly know the client best can say, this was a lapse in judgment versus this person still really has a problem and we need to extend their time. And then I forgot the second part of what I was going to say.
are you asking me what my second part of the question was?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, it was, now that I've forgotten it too. Um, no, I can't remember. But I guess
Sorry, I do remember. You were
okay.
asking about other programs and how they're
Yes,
conceptualized.
thank you.
So I mean, I think I would just kind of point you back to the chart and how it's difficult because a lot of them are looking at impaired practice, and we're not really doing that. And so it's just because all of the different laps serve different functions within the bar that are pretty distinct from ours, it's kind of hard to compare them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I wonder, and this may be a committee question as opposed to just a Heather question of, and Shelley, I see your hand, of whether, like, is it worth, long-term taking a look at kind of what the other LAP programs are doing and really kind of whether our program is, the success rates of the program and whether we really need to look at overhauling what we're doing and how we're doing it. I don't know. That's just sort of a question to be out there. But I completely recognize and appreciate the subjectivity of the clinician. I just wonder if there's some inherent unfairness depending on the clinician who might be, you might have someone who's very generous towards people and another clinician who's like very hard nosed and like same situation, same response, different result, different outcome. And so I guess like I just wonder, is there going to be any kind of like guideline for the clinicians in terms of making those, how like the sort of like a decision tree or kind of something like that provides a guide to them in terms of what does this really look like in practice versus let's just leave it very subjective.
Did you want to ask your question, Shelley, or I can kind of, or so I mean, I think too, when I'm saying clinician, that's kind of a stand-in for the team. So it's not just one person making those decisions. And I think from, we met with people who are involved in the teams. It sounds like it really is a collaborative process and that it's been working well the way that it's been going.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Shelley, it looks like you have a question.
Just a comment that might be helpful. Actually, Dr. Yanni stole one of them, which is great. So a couple of things that came to mind that might be helpful to consider. One, of course, is that it's a committee, and the group facilitator who knows the participant very well and sees them every week is a part of the committee. So we have very robust conversations in the committee. We don't always agree, which is why we have a really good team. It's great. We have certain people that are like, no way. So we have these very rich discussions until we can reach something we can live with, where we reach a consensus. So it is a great system for that reason. And I think nothing removes bias entirely or favoritism, but I think it does a pretty good job. So I just want to throw that out if it's of any comfort. The other thing is that most people do not complete or graduate LAP, being completion and graduation being synonymous in the language. So it used to be more common, as I understand it. I've just been here 8 years. So as I understand it, in the past, the state bar court would sometimes require that people graduate from LAP. And we just don't see that as much. Very often, the alternative discipline program, the requirement that sends people to enroll voluntarily in LAP, is more like an 18-month length of time. So the standard for graduation/completion that we have internally with LAP is our own. And we find it's usually, Michelle, you can correct me, but in my experience, it's sort of becoming the creme de la creme because people are wanting that for their own, sometimes they're wanting it for their own accomplishment. So it does change it a little bit because it's not like I have to do this thing, so I might be cheating. It's more about this is a person who walks and talks the recovery activities, has incorporated it into their life, can write about it, can reflect about it, has been talking about it for years in their group, and the group facilitator has witnessed it. So it's, I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there. And then my third and final, I had one more comment. I should have written it down. I'm so sorry. I think I saved the best for last and the file got deleted. I know what it is. Okay. So we are not, the CRT, the clinical review team in LAP tends to be strict. We are not chomping at the bit to make things easier. So where we sometimes have a sort of a feeling of like, ugh, this didn't do a person justice is here, I'll give you the example. It's sometimes it's an interruption in monitoring. So I have one participant, for example, who is amazing. He's a sponsor. He is very, very active in his group, his weekly LAP group. He's kind of a leader, gives sage advice. He's been monitored for more than 4 years in the program. But we automatically, because of our strict rules for LAP completion graduation, we had to reset his LAP graduation eligibility because he missed a test on a 3-day weekend where he had his son. It was like this, he forgot to check in. So it wasn't even that he checked in for testing and said, ooh, I was selected, I'm not going to test. He forgot to check in, which was very abnormal. Everything in me, everything in the group facilitator, everything else was good, and everything in us was just like, oh, I wish this hadn't reset him, because he immediately came forward. He was horrified, like, oh, you're right, I did forget. So that's like one of a few examples that can come up for somebody that, with the current rules, we aren't allowed to make an exception for. But I don't want you, Heather, especially, your concern is it's so valuable. Like, I don't want you to get the message that with this change, this clinical review team would be like, let everybody through. That's not how it would roll. It gives us, in those rare circumstances, a little leeway to let somebody who truly has earned it and is showing it in every way to not have to restart the clock. I don't know if they're helpful things, but I wanted to throw them out there for you.
I think that's super helpful. And I think
good.
what I was getting at more is like that is totally a lapse in judgment and error, like versus like him going out using and then being like, I forgot. So that's where I wonder about the continuous sobriety versus like substantial compliance with monitoring, and whether it's worth distinguishing. But I don't want to hold up the vote on that, but it's just kind of a food for thought in terms of, what does substantial compliance look like versus, 3 years of continuous sobriety, and how important is that to like maintain that? Because it sounds like this guy had like his full 4 years of continuous sobriety. He just forgot to take the test. I feel like that's really different than someone who went out and used. That's just my thought process. So,
And we did talk about the substantial term, and we're about to go on another like 3-month can of worms about, how do we define substantial? So this is really just how can we kind of make this as simple as possible to allow for the flexibility that's not there, and have something to show for our 2 years of work.
This is Jim Heiding.
I think it's a great idea.
Can I
Jim?
ask, can I ask the committee and maybe Shelley about how do you think this will affect the rates of completion, successful completion? Do you think it will increase them substantially or at all? A little bit? What?
That's such a good question, Jim. I'd be curious to hear what Michelle thinks, because Michelle's been in, a slightly different version of my role for a long time. But my hunch is that it will affect a few people. But the effect will be really important. So I don't think it'll affect a ton of people, but it will give us the ability to feel like we'll be getting it right. And we'll have that flexibility to get it right so that those few people that this affects can still graduate. Without, and following our own rules.
I definitely agree with that.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, the number of people who complete, and I didn't go back and look at our annual reports and fact sheets before coming onto this, but it's a handful a year, maybe 10 a year. And so it's not a huge number of people that's affecting. There's not a huge number of people who try and complete. But yes, there are those few who sometimes are just that I'm just not gonna do it. Like in the case that Shelley's talking about, it's not worth the expense to try and hang out for another 6 months just so I can complete that. I don't need to be here for anybody. I was just doing it for my own benefit. So for those few people who would be able to now qualify where they would have been excluded for something in the past. So we're talking, if you say it'll affect 10% of the people who want to graduate, but so that's one person out of the 10 who want to graduate for the year. So I think it will make a difference. It will not be a huge difference in numbers, but it will matter very much to the few people who it does affect.
Can I just ask that we track this data to see like what is the impact of the change? Has it enabled people to be more successfully completing the program? And if so, what is happening? Because I think Tracy and I looked at some recidivism numbers like a year ago, and some of it was concerning because it's like, yeah, they completed the program, they successfully completed, but then they just go back and do what they do after the monitoring is over. And that is concerning. So I wonder if maybe it's worth tracking the data to see, is there something like, is this working? Or like in a year or two, do we need to actually really reevaluate and make another recommendation in addition to this?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think I know the numbers that you were talking about recidivism, and those were alternative discipline program numbers. LAP doesn't keep numbers on because recidivate in what way, right? This really goes back to what the 3 people on this working group struggled with so much just week after week, is how are we pulling apart these threads of what is treatment? What are we really doing here? This is monitoring. This is not treating the person. They absolutely will have treatment. We will be making sure that they are following through on their treatment, but we're not the ones doing the treatment. And in a way, it's saying nobody has to do lab, right? You know, people can get recovery many ways, especially in California. There's so many resources for people to get recovery. They don't need lab for that. But lab can be really very helpful and supportive for those people who choose it because they know that it's supportive. You know, I always talk about the person from one of my original caseloads when I started. So we're talking pushing 20 years now, who still goes to the lab group because he finds it supportive and helpful. And this is where he's found his network. So could he have graduated? Yes, he could have graduated quite some time ago, but didn't choose to because he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to leave. And so people use it in different ways for what helps them. The only people that are affected by the completion it used to be the ones who were required to by the court, and more is becoming there aren't even as many required by the court anymore. They're doing it because they want to have, you know, the certificate, the pride of knowing that it's like, you know, they want their chip, they want the recognition that this is something they completed. So so the recidivism numbers that you were talking about were about alternative discipline, people who had gone through alternative discipline program and then had further complaints about their practice, which may be related or may not be related. There was no numbers on that, whether that's related to their sobriety or their mental health stability, the recovery at all.
Right. And I think that's what Tracy and I were wondering too. So that's why I think it's important to just kind of track the data and see what's coming up. Okay, is there any other comments about this particular motion that's on the floor? Okay, we will go for a vote. Erica, could you please call roll?
Jim Hiding,
Yes.
Lisa Johnson,
Yes.
Joan Lobomirski,
Yes.
Deidre Wen,
Yes.
Ryan Peterson, Catherine Young, Heather Benton.
Yes.
I think you skipped Tracy and I,
Yes.
but I'm a yes.
I'm
I'm
a
so
yes
sorry.
too. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Great, awesome, great work, guys. Really appreciate that. I think this is gonna hopefully make a huge difference in how people are finishing things and getting through the program. Okay, so next topic on our agenda is agenda item 4.3. Let's see, sorry, I lost my place. Planning discussion for 2026, Lawyer Assistance Program Oversight Committee Work Plan. And so this is really a discussion opportunity. And we have a document that was attached to the agenda that talks about kind of the areas that LAP is kind of oversight and should be overseeing and addressing. So who is going to talk about this one? Is that you, Michelle?
I can start it off unless you
Yeah, that would be great.
to. Sure. So the Lawyer Assistance Program Oversight Committee hasn't traditionally formed a work plan of this sort, but this is something that has come up with in the Board of Trustees meetings that they would like the sub-entities, of which the Lawyer Assistance Program is one of the board sub-entities, to create a work plan to ensure that it's in alignment with the priorities of the board and the state bar's strategic goals. So the second page, I was going to hold it up here, it's probably not going to show. The second page is really important if you can get to, or rather the attachment of that agenda item, if you can see. It's laid out as a table describing the general item of the work plan and then description. These were some ideas and suggestions generated by staff, but based on goals that the committee had worked on. So this is not, it's not necessarily a staff plan. It's not a plan, you know, for example, on the monitoring side, for the monitoring staff to know how to do the monitoring. It's a plan for what the oversight committee is going to be working on for 2026. And some of the things that this committee has talked about in the past are on here. And then some of the things that are general core functions that the committee does, for example, reviewing the quarterly satisfaction surveys when I present the report, the fact sheet, words escaping me. When I present the fact sheet each year, you all review the statistics and what's happening with the program, and then we have a satisfaction survey that we report the metrics every once in a while. And that does get reported to the board annually also of our percentage on 2 of the questions on the satisfaction survey. So that's an obvious kind of recurring item that the committee does. The financial assistance has definitely been a big topic here that the committee has been working on. And as we already talked about today, figuring out how to better fine tune this grant program. Seems like a worthwhile project for the Oversight Committee for 2026. Some things we had also talked about in the past were looking kind of like what Heather is saying for the clinicians on the monitoring side, reviewing the work that or reviewing the procedures that the clinicians follow to ensure that there's consistency and best practices are followed. And then a collaboration, we certainly don't need to keep that on here, but this was like what we had been talking about with the working group that Jim and Heather started this meeting discussing, and how that relates to the goals, the core goals and strategic plan of the state bar. So this is an opportunity for the group to brainstorm about what ideas, what priorities you want to have for 2026. And then we'll come back in December when we have our December meeting. After you all give some feedback to the staff, I'll put together more of a finalized chart like this that then we could then vote to adopt in December as the work plan for 2026.
Great. So I think unless anybody has any objection, I would probably remove the specific collaboration related to the wellness, only because I think Ken is probably going to head that up in general and let us know if he needs any support from LAPOC. Great. Okay, so we have 3 sort of comprehensive areas, but I'd like to start the conversation with, we have these 3 areas. We've got review metrics, financial assistance, and practices and procedures. Is there anything else that you as committee members or as staff are seeing or observing that you think the Oversight Committee should tackle? And look into maybe create a working group for. Is there anything that you're thinking of? I think Jim may have some ideas too, so.
I have lots of ideas, but I have to admit that I somehow missed the attachment. And so I have not looked at the work plan outline, so I apologize for that. But I was wondering, the 3 areas are reviewing the metrics, finance, and what else? What was the third one?
It was
Practices and procedures. As a suggestion, though, these are not certainly not written in stone.
Yeah, I understand. So, one of the things that Michelle and I have talked about in between meetings is what can we do in regard to the Bagley-Keene Act, and how much interaction can we have, and what happens to all this information? So, from my understanding, this would be an outline that's sent out to the committee members, and we are to respond to the staff without sharing the information between the committee members. Is that right?
Yes. So, Erica, if you'd like to weigh in as the relative expert on Bagley-Keene here, but essentially,
Yeah, that's correct. So if you want to provide input outside, I was going to say collaborate, but that's not feasible under Bagley-Keene. So if you want to provide input on the work plan outside of this meeting, the best way to accomplish that is you can send the work plan, your recommendations for the work plan to staff. Staff would essentially collate those, and then they could be posted for continued discussion at the subsequent meeting, and people could, vote things off or add different ideas and so forth.
Okay, how about this? How about if I suggest this? See what staff thinks about this. If we, and the committee members, if we get this back to you within a month, with our ideas and ideals of some of the goals and things that we should be tackling for the Oversight Committee, then if you would collate them, send them back out, summarize them, send them back out to the committee members with their ability to add, amend, change, increase, whatever they want to do, more things that they think or support certain things, and then send it back to staff. Is that available to do that?
Unfortunately not. It would be that one time. So it could be shared to staff for discussion at the future meeting, but you can't engage. It's essentially a serial meeting that way, where it's different people engaging in.
Joan knows all of this stuff from her political activities.
She's nodding too, which makes me more comfortable with my response here, which is good. But that's
Well,
yeah.
I
So
don't like
essentially,
any
that's
of
a
this,
serial meeting. Yeah.
but all right. So how about if we set up another meeting sooner than December, so that we could get things back to you, to staff, and then discuss them in an open meeting, and then have time to reflect on them and start that again? Because frankly, I think that a planning meeting like this, that where you develop a work plan, and we're going to affect years and years, hopefully, of the LAP, and hopefully put in policies and protections for the LAP that'll be jealous of our roles here to protect the LAP, to protect its budget, to provide as much as we can to the lawyers and judges of the state, so that recovery of a good wellness program is in their future. I think requires some time, and so I think that the planning meeting, to me, could take a day, and I would suggest that it be in person, and that we do it as soon as we can, which would probably be, I don't know if it'd be December or when it would be, but I know that most people are from the Southern California area. Some people are from Northern California, but not many. And so hopefully we could do that and do it inexpensively and have that kind of planning meeting. But if we could have the two meetings, perhaps that's a way to get around this.
Yeah, I actually really like your idea, Jim, and was going to ask about doing a second meeting in between now and the December meeting. I guess I kind of have two questions. One is, in terms of cost, do we have the budget for the handful of people that would need to come in from another area? And two, I think that was my only question. So do we have the budget for that? And if we do, then I'm sure Jim and you can coordinate, we can coordinate to figure it out. But I do think a planning meeting, like a day-long planning meeting, is kind of essential in this case, because it sounds like there are a number of things we want to discuss, and I don't think we want to take a haphazard or hurried approach to it. I think we want to really, I didn't see the attachment either until today, so it's very hard for me to have a cogent conversation about it without having taken a look at it and really understanding what statutorily we are required to do, but also where we are, like, what are the needs? And I think maybe that would be something we have kind of the three items we've been working on. But if there is information on where does monitored and support LAP need oversight, help, assistant, like what are the areas that there are maybe gaps or support or clarification is needed, that would be very helpful. So maybe the staff can put something together briefly to send out to the committee in preparation for the planning meeting.
We have had, in that regard, efforts in the past, to put things together, and some things would be very relevant in my way of thinking, especially to people who haven't been on this committee or been that acquainted with state bar issues over the past years. I'll tell you, I made a little list. It's a big list, but I made a little list that may be important to people, and that is the LAP orientation packet. And I know that the new people are supposed to get that, but I think it's relevant to all of us, and it's a good reminder of what goes on here. So the new member orientation materials, the last LAP strategic plan. I don't know if that was 2017 or when that was, but certainly the last LAP strategic plan that was prepared, the original annual report maybe from 2003. The last two annual reports, I think, would be important. The code sections and the rules that apply for those people who aren't familiar with those specific code sections and rules, so that we understand our role better. Of course, a list of our contacts and contact information, both not only on the committee, but with staff, and what the roles are of everybody. Perhaps an outline of the Bagley-Keene Act, and a small little blurb on the current committees, subcommittees, efforts, programs, and participation that we're currently involved with. So that would give everybody a good, I think, summary of what we're doing so far and how our history has evolved, and would give us a kind of a baseline to go forward. And I understand it's a lot of work, and I apologize for even making the suggestion, but I think that if I'm trying to consider what I need to do and what I need to be responsible for, I'd like to see those things.
So, to address a couple of those things. So yes, all of these things that you've listed, we could find, the old annual reports, and I didn't keep, I'm going to come back and watch the recordings and copy down the list of all of the things that you have requested. Of course, the Bagley-Keene rules, the statute outlines what this group is doing. The strategic plans. This is different from the strategic plan, though. We did used to make strategic plans for this committee, and then at some point that was determined that the board makes strategic, or the bar makes strategic plans, that each individual subcommittee does not. This is not quite as extensive. The work plan is very high level, and it is more akin to what we have been doing actually in our usually December meetings each year, is making the working groups for the following year and deciding, what are going to be the couple few priorities with the people that we have here who would like to form some working groups to focus on for the upcoming 1 year. Certainly we can have more meetings. We can make another meeting between now and December and then have a December meeting. We'll have to take a look at the budget. I don't know. We certainly hadn't budgeted for that in the year, to have an in-person meeting and an extra Zoom meeting, because of course, if we're doing it virtually, that still requires all of the members posting their locations. And so we're hiring the, WeWork locations and the other types of spaces that people are working out of. So we perhaps can take a look at the budget, and then staff can communicate with all of you. So we can send an email to everybody and let you know what we're looking at. And we can send, like we often do, the doodle poll in order to get everybody's availability to schedule another meeting. But I can definitely put together some of those resources, Jim, that you were asking about, or all of them. I'll go back and look at the recording and then put that into an email to send to everybody, and then we can figure out how much discussion you think we need, how much time it's going to take for to come up with our goals for 26.
And I think maybe Jim can just email it to you directly, Michelle. Would that work too? So he doesn't violate Bagley-Keene instead of the whole committee. So Jim, would you mind just emailing her your list directly?
I can do that, sure.
Okay. That way
Joan
she
had
doesn't have to
something
spend
to
time
say.
watching. Would you say, Jim?
I think Joan was raising her hand. I couldn't tell.
No? Oh, okay. Is there any other comments or thoughts on this particular agenda item? Nope. Okay, so it sounds like, Michelle, you and your team, probably Erica, I'm guessing, will send out a doodle poll to kind of schedule another meeting, hopefully in person, but you're going to look at the budget and let us know. Follow-up actions that we need to take care of before we end today. Just be thinking about whether you are interested in the vice chair role. I believe that probably I or Jim or probably Michelle would be happy to chat with anybody who's interested in the vice chair role. So just reach out and we'll make it happen. And then Michelle is going to get us the information that Jim requested, and then we will, in that doodle poll, Erica, could you send out for dates for both this supplementary meeting as well as the December meeting, so we can get both of those on calendar?
Yes.
Great. Any other thoughts, concerns?
I do want to say thank
Yes.
you to Heather Benton for her service and for being a wonderful chair over this past year and for stepping into that role. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
And I
Great.
also want to, in her absence, thank Melanie Lawrence
Yeah,
for her efforts. She was quite a leader for the committee. And so if you would pass that on to her, we would appreciate that. And Tracy, again, thanks a lot.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
You too. Thank you.
Great, great. We
Okay.
are, and Tracy, thank you again.
You're
You're
welcome.
amazing. We might have to come pick your brain sometime.
Feel free. Feel free.
All
It's
right,
you guys have good work ahead of you. Have a good time.
I think we have some good times ahead, some
I think you
engaging
do.
times. Yep.
All right. Take
All
care.
right, then we will adjourn for today and we will look to hear from the staff. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Take
Have
care.
a great rest of your day and a good
You too.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Erica, you can end the recording.